Hi, this is Ken Gosnell with CEO Experience, and today on my Well Done podcast, I'm delighted to welcome Glen Van Peski. Glenn is a tremendous business owner and recently wrote a tremendous book that tells the story of his business, but also tells the story of his life. And so, Glenn, welcome to the podcast today.
Thanks, Ken. Thanks for having me. It's an honor to be here.
Well, I was honored to get an early copy of your book before it was actually released, so I was able to be a little bit on the launch team. But can you tell a little bit about your book and why you decided to write a book right now?
Well, I decided to write a book because a friend of mine kind of pestered me into it over the years, and that's the whole story. Um, yeah, John Mackey, friend of mine, he actually wrote the foreword for the book.
Absolutely.
But it occurred to me that so I've spent, depending on how you count it, say 50 years working on lowering my base pack weight or my backpacking gear without food and water. And so now that's under 5 pounds when I go out. So that's, tent, sleeping bag, cooking gear, pack, sleeping pad, clothes, all that stuff is typically under 5 pounds for me. And it occurred to me that as I worked to lighten my backpacking load, that some of those lessons applied had greater application to life in general. And so that's the premise of the book. Take less so you can do more. Surprising life lessons in generosity, gratitude, and curiosity from an ultralight backpacker.
Yeah, I love it. I have a copy of your book right here as well. And like I said, I was an early adopter to the book or reader of the book. And I just appreciate the lessons that you had in there. And I grew up camping, so I understand the value of backpacks. So can you tell a little bit about, you talk a little bit about how you started your business. Can you give that background to our listeners so they can understand about your backpacks and what you currently sell in your business?
Sure. So I founded Gossamer Gear. Originally, it's Gossamer Gear today. So in around 1997, 98, I started sewing packs for myself. And there's a whole long story on that. But basically, you couldn't buy the first pack I bought to go on a week long Sierra trek with my son Brian, who was in Boy Scouts, weighed 7.5 pounds empty. So that's like 50% more than all my gear today. Um, and so I thought, well, that's a good place to start. And my mom was convinced that every kid should leave home knowing how to cook, bake, and sew. So I just started, I'm an engineer by training. I started sketching things up, cutting them out, and sewing them together. So eventually, by the time I got to the fourth pack, I was pretty happy. It suited where I was at that point. And so this was early internet days, and I put the plans on the internet so people could, make them for free and print them out or measure out and order the fabric and make their own pack. But I kept getting calls from people that said, "Hey, I don't know how to sew, and I don't know anyone that knows how to sew. Can you make one for me?" And I said, "Yeah, I couldn't. It's like a 10-hour process individually, measuring out, cutting out the fabric. And I'm working 78 hours a week as a civil engineer. It's like, no, I'm not going to make you a pack." But I got enough inquiries that I thought, well, I felt bad that these people couldn't get a light pack. And so I was talking to the sisters actually that run Quest Outfitters in Florida, and they turned me on to a guy who was in an industry magazine that was up in Seattle. And so I talked to Monty, and I figured based on the inquiries I'd gotten, the emails and phone calls, that, if I had 25 packs made, then everyone who wanted one would have one, and I could go back to doing my civil engineering without the interruption. And so I talked to Monty up in Seattle and sent him a pack to look at. And he says, "Oh yeah, we can do packs. We've done packs for JanSport and other major manufacturers." And he says, "Our minimum order is 100." I go, "Whoo, 100?" It's like, I don't need 100 packs. I need 25 packs. So we went back and forth and finally settled on 50. I think, okay, they'll be in my garage in a box for like 5 years probably, but I'll eventually get rid of them somehow. And so he made some early attempts at the pack that I had made, and we kind of went back and forth. I go, "No, this is not quite right." And And he said, finally, these are not like the other packs we made. I said, yeah, that's kind of the point, you know? So we finally got to where they were able to sew the packs. And so we ordered all the fabric and they start working on them. And our son, Brian, our oldest, who um, was on that first scout trip, he put together a rudimentary website that people could fill out an order form and it would send me an email. And so I'm sitting at my desk one evening and suddenly I get an email and it's an order. It's like, oh, what do I do? So, so what I did is I didn't know what to do. I grabbed a yellow pad of paper that was on my desk and wrote down the name and the order. And, I still have that pad of
Oh,
paper.
wow.
This is not all of them. And so, I wrote it down and they had to mail a check in. So I knew, not to mail the pack out until I got the check in. Um, and I started writing down names. And before Monty was even done with the order of 50 packs, I had 86 orders. So I thought, this might not go quite the way I was figuring. So anyway, we had to order more fabric and things kind of got out of control from there. So,
I love the startup story, and I really resonated with your story of your mom teaching you the value of sewing. My mother was a seamstress, by the way, and I had three brothers, so we had four of us as boys growing up. And she said there were five things every boy needed to know. One was to sew, how to sew things, how to clean, how to cook, how to do your own laundry, and how to treat a woman. And so she tried to teach us those things. So I still carry a sewing kit with me everywhere I go. So I didn't quite become the seamstress or the engineer like you, but I really resonated with that story that you had. What would you tell a startup today? I love how you took a step of faith, but then you also recognize that, hey, I may have these backpacks for a while. But what would you tell an entrepreneur or somebody that's trying to start a business that has an idea? What encouragement might you give them today?
well, I've had this discussion with both our boys who both have side gigs, things they've done. And I think there's, the classic story is you start a side gig and then you throw everything into it and build it to a big company and go public or whatever. That doesn't happen for very many of them. Um, and so I never quit my day job. I never took a salary from Gossamer Gear. We'll do millions of dollars of business this year, but I've never taken a salary. I always worked full time, very full time at my civil engineering job. And yes, that took a toll on me and my family because of the hours, but it allowed me with the business to just make what I wanted. Since I wasn't relying on the pack business to pay the rent or put the kids through college, um, I could just make what I wanted. And that was very freeing. I just made gear that I wanted to use. And our early pack line from the G4 to the G5 to the G6 got progressively smaller and lighter as my pack got lighter and smaller. And so I just made what I wanted. And if someone else liked that, they could buy it. But I wasn't interested. I did no market research. I didn't really care what other people wanted because I wasn't making any money at it. So I could just make what I wanted, um, and pour everything back into the business. And evidently, enough people wanted what I what I wanted. Now, the business today, we have paid employees, 401ks and healthcare and stuff like that. And we make products that appeal to a wide variety. We want to meet people where they are and then help them get as light as they want to be on the trail. So that business model only goes so far. And in fact, we got to the point where I was going to close down the company because we're working 60, 70 hours doing the engineering and another 30 doing the gear business.
Mhm.
And it was obvious one had to go. And since one was paying the mortgage and the college funds and the other was paying zero, it was pretty obvious which one had to go. But about that time, through another long story, I met John Mackey co-founded Whole Foods Market, and he ended up investing in the company and hiring someone to run it. So, I still own a piece of it, still actively involved in the company, but just not in the day-to-day stuff, which is
Right.
good because like you don't want me doing customer service.
Well, I think you have a very good personality, so I think you'd be great at that. But I did love the engineering aspect of it. And in the appendix of your book, I love the details that you talk about, even what you carry around in a pack and then the weight of it, and just how you've analyzed and processed almost every aspect of not only the backpack itself, but also what you carry on a trail, or what a hiker should carry with them. So I just love that perspective that you have.
Well, there's probably an application for that, which I just thought about as you were saying that for life in general. I didn't talk about that in the book, but it kind of comes under counting the cost. I talk in the book about creating margin so that we have the ability to help others, especially divine appointments that come across our path. And I talk about creating margin in um, time, money, and energy, and counting the cost of things like obligations. I mean, I guess financially could apply to all three. I guess um, I'm not very good at this. I swing between historically being like way overcommitted, and then I say no to everything. And then finally, opportunities start coming up, and I convince myself, well, yeah, that's great, and it's good people, and kind of fits with something else I'm doing. And before long, it's like you look at them individually, but when you step back and look at all of them, it's like, oh wow, I'm way overcommitted here. So
Right, right. Well, we teach the principle of knowing your yeses and nos. Jesus made a statement to his disciples that are really powerful for us in business, that let our yes be yes and our no be no. And sometimes it's hard to discern what those yes and nos are, but I like that you're still, it's a lifetime journey of figuring out yeses and nos, right? That we have
well,
to figure out what God's called us to do.
that's a great lesson because right away in my mind I thought, well, it's not a problem of yes being yes, no being no. It's a problem of saying yes too often. But that is the problem because if you really committed to when I say yes to something,
Right.
it's an all-in yes commitment, then you're a little more sparing with the yes instead of people say, hey, you want to help out with this? Oh yeah, sure. So yeah,
Right.
no, those are wise words, obviously.
You talked about taking less, and you wrote a chapter in your book, which I loved. That was chapter 6, take less to give more. And you referenced that a little bit more. The more you have for margin, the more that you're able to give back. That's been part of the DNA of your business and really part of the DNA of your life. Can you tell us how you discovered that when you take less, you have the ability to give more?
This is something, it's interesting having the book out there for a couple of months now, starting to get feedback on the things that have touched people. And I was at a event Tuesday and Thursday of this week, a live event. And it's always interesting to me, kind of the things that stick with people. And that generosity thing might be the number one thing that comes up for people that they find a value and are going to make changes to their lives based on that, which is intriguing to me. Um, so I actually started this before I was a believer. My mom, we grew up with the term noblesse oblige, which, from a secular perspective, if you have, it comes with an obligation to give.
Hmm.
And so I grew up with that. When I had my engineering business in San Marcos early days, there was a little flower shop across the railroad tracks, and I would go in there and I gave the gal my credit card number and said, "Hey, when someone comes in, looks like they need a little something extra, just charge it to my card and call me and tell me afterwards." And I mean, the stories I got back were just so cool and gave me so much more um, than whatever the charge was. And I recently read Infectious Generosity.
Yeah.
Great book, not from a biblical perspective, but just from a scientific, social study perspective, saying that the generous people experience a boost in happiness roughly equivalent to a doubling of salary.
Mhm.
So if everyone thinks like, oh yeah, if I double my salary, yeah, I'd be happy. Well, you can achieve that just by being generous. And it's
Right.
intriguing to me that most of the studies involved giving people money that they had control over, and they could either keep it or give it. And, the vast majority of people gave most of it away. And, their responses became the study. And so early on in life, I wanted to be intentional in my giving because I think everyone wants to be generous, but you find out about a coworker that's going through surgery or whatever, and it's like, I want to help, but the kids just got braces, or my transmission just went out, or there's friction there. It's hard to be as generous as you want, and so I started early on having a separate account. Now we call it our tithing account. Back then, I wasn't a believer. Call it my world peace account. I have no idea why I thought that was cool, but just kind of told you where my head was at, I guess. And I started with 5% of my after tax income, and just every paycheck it went in. Actually, when I worked at the city, they had automatic deposit. And so I could just automatically deposit, a percentage of my paycheck to go into this separate tithing fund.
Right.
And over time, my rule of thumb is if it doesn't make a difference in how I live, I can probably do more. If I'm not making decisions differently, at least some decisions based on my giving, then I could probably do more.
Mhm.
And so today it's a very significant portion of our after-tax income that goes into this separate account. And so, it's intriguing to me. It somewhat duplicates like these studies because it's a separate account. And obviously, I mean, we have control of money because we write the checks, but it's not part of our budget. I mean, in our mind, it's God's money, and we're just waiting for direction as to what has our name on it. So we never have to ask the question, do we have money? We just have to ask the question, does this have our name on it? And so, a couple examples. Francie had a friend at work whose son had made some bad decisions, ended up in prison, and he died in prison. She didn't have money for a funeral. And so, we're able to write a check and make that happen. So, and there's many other examples. And I was speaking in Portland Tuesday, and it was a predominantly hiker group, but this question came up and we're exploring that. And to see the lady who asked the question, see her eyes light up, like it's just like I'm giving away like someone else's money. And it's like and the joy on her face when she realized that she could do this and how cool it would be. I can't wait to see what she does with it. But
That's awesome. I love that perspective of does this have my name on it, right? And that's a neat way to look at stewardship. We teach the principle of moving from owner to overseer in your business, that we don't really own it, God owns it. We're just stewards of it, which includes our time and our finances, our resource. But boy, that question, what a best idea that is. Does this have my name on it? Right? From a stewardship perspective, am I supposed to do it or am I supposed to give it away? So thank you for
well,
sharing.
and
Beautiful.
that was actually one question from this lady on Tuesday was, there's so many needs. There's an endless supply of needs. How do you figure out where to donate the money? And
Mhm.
my answer to her was, well, obviously a chunk goes to our local church, and we have ministries, ongoing ministries for orphans and things like that. They're important to us for a variety of reasons. And so, missionary people that we know and kids of friends that we know that are in the missionary field. And so we have things like that we support. But I said, we reserve a good chunk of it for those kind of divine appointments. And so, when I meet someone today, it's exciting because I don't know, am I meeting them because there's something I need that they're going to give me, or maybe a word that I need to hear that they're going to tell me?
Mhm.
Or am I meeting them? Are we coming together so that I can help them? And, maybe I have a word for them that's going to change the way they look at something. And it's going to unlock something for them. And sometimes I think I know how it's going to go, and doesn't go that way. I recently, well, a few years back now, I was before the book putting together a website because they told me that's important. You got to do that if you're going to have a book. So I think, well, I need some good photography, because everyone knows you've really made it when your photos actually look better than you do in person. So, which I have finally achieved, I'm glad to say. Um, so I asked a local guy in town that knows everybody, and he referred me to this one guy. I met him for coffee, and he says, I don't do that kind of photography, but talk to this other guy. And this other guy, he told me, is like, recently got a terminal diagnosis, so don't wait too long to call him back. So I made an appointment for coffee with this second photographer. And then before I went there, I remembered that I knew a through hiker who had taken some pictures for me before. And I go, oh, I'll just call Splash, her trail name, and she'll take some pictures. I don't really need to talk to this other guy. Um, but I thought, well, I already got the coffee, I'll just go talk to him. And so we talked, and, we determined I now didn't need him to take any pictures of me, any portraits, but he talked about his diagnosis and, having quit work and having a bucket list of things he'd kind of like to do before he left this realm. And, one of them was go to Patagonia.
Wow.
He wasn't sure how it was going to happen, but, because we've been intentional, we can write a check and help make that happen. So, sometimes I meet someone thinking like, oh, they're going to do something that I need. It's like, oh, no, that's not what this is about. I'm going to help them do something. So,
I love it. I love it. Well, you mentioned earlier that you started your business before you became a Christian. And one of the things I do love about your book is you're very authentic and real about your faith story. Can you tell us a little bit about how you became a Christian and for those that haven't had a chance to read the book yet?
sure. Yeah. The gopher conversion. Um, Francie grew up Catholic, so she's always believed, it's just never a question. She just grew up with that. And I really didn't. We didn't, my mom had us christened for some reason, and I had no idea what that was. We just went to the church one Sunday and did something, and I don't even remember it. I mean, I kind of remember, I have a picture in my mind, but and then when she divorced my dad, when I was in fourth grade and we moved back east to Western Massachusetts, she started going to Quaker meeting. And so we went with her because we were young. And I understand that Society of Friends, or Quakers as they're commonly known, meet. They're different in different parts of the country, but at least this one that we went to, there was no preacher. It was a circle, and everyone filed in and sat, because the feeling was that there's that of God in everyone. And so if the Spirit is giving you a message to share, then you get up and say something, then you sit down. And sometimes the hour would go by with no one saying anything. And sometimes people are coming up and down like popcorn. Um, and as a kid, I didn't have training in God and Jesus or anything, but, I saw barefoot hippies in holy jeans sitting next to people dressed like you are in a suit. Um, and I remember that making an impression, like there's something here that obviously transcends these people's lifestyles and who they are. But didn't think much about it. I was a kid. And then when my mom said, well, you guys are old enough, you can choose to go to meeting or not. I was like, well, I'll do something else on Sunday. Um, go fool around outside. So, um, let's see, I'm trying to think. It's been a long story. I was almost killed in a plane crash, and after that plane crash, it killed the pilot. Actually, a friend of mine in San Diego had me over to his house and told me that the fact that I'd survived the plane crash was a good thing since I didn't believe in Jesus, um, and also might be a sign that God had something for me to do, and that I should maybe figure out what that was. So I thanked him for his time, and I don't know, I wasn't ready. And so I went back to life, building a business, and it was probably the birth of our middle son, um, Derek, was. So I'm an engineer. I'm used to solving problems. Like, how hard can it be? Get the right people, figure things out. I'm not afraid of hard work. I'll do whatever it takes. But Derek was born severely disabled, and that Francie spiraled into depression, and that was a problem I couldn't fix, and no amount of work and calculations was going to fix that. And we checked out some different churches, and our neighbors around the alley, they had kids the same ages as our other kids. And so they played together. They were going to a little church on the coast in Encinitas. Um, so we started going there. But I don't know, I couldn't figure out a way to put it all together. And then one day I started getting gophers in the backyard. And I don't know if you've ever gotten gophers. Like you get one and you kind of ignore it, kind of tamp it down and hope like, maybe they'll go somewhere else. And then pretty soon there's two and three, and then there's five. And it's like, oh my gosh, we got a gopher city here. So one day, one weekend, it's like, okay, I got to do something about these gophers. I tried smoke bombs and firecrackers, everything, nothing worked. So finally, I'll just flood them out. So I put a hose down, kind of cleared out one hole, put a hose down, turned it on, nothing. I mean, the water's just pouring in. I turned the hose up, turned it up again. It's gushing full bore, no sign of water anywhere. It's like, oh my gosh, how about like you must have like a whole city underneath my backyard here.
Mhm.
So finally, there was a hole near the front of the house, near the side of the garage, the right side of the garage. It was kind of the lowest point on the lot. And so water starts finally seeping out of this. Well, there's got to be like hundreds of gallons of water in my backyard at this point. Starts seeping out. And so I thought, well, if it flushes them out, they're going to come out here. So I grabbed a shovel, and I figure when it comes out, I'm going to kill this guy and hope that there aren't like 10 now. Um, and as I'm sitting there and the water's gurgling up and still no sign of the gopher, and I'm really upset about my yard and the gophers. And I thought, well, I'll try prayer. And so I prayed to God. I go, God, I get the whole eternal salvation thing. That sounds like a good deal, but I want to know, are you good for any of this day-to-day stuff? Because like eternity hopefully is a long way off for me. I was young. I was like, what about the day-to-day stuff like this darn gopher? And right after I prayed that prayer, the gopher sputtered and popped up, and I killed it. Sorry, gopher, that you were used that way by God. Um, and went up to our neighbors and said, what must I do to be saved? And God answered my prayer. And, I've come to a fuller understanding that God doesn't necessarily solve all our gopher problems. He will walk through us with the gopher problems. But on that day, he decided, Glenn, I'm going to answer your prayer. I'm going to fix your gopher problem for you. And
I,
I never had gophers again in that backyard.
yeah, I love the story. I just think it's so fantastic that you turned to God right in that moment of handling a difficult situation. And, I resonate with you. I don't know the depths of your son. You talk a little bit about in the book. Our youngest son, we have four children. Our oldest is a daughter, and then we have three boys. Our youngest son, Kysten, has disabilities and is has apraxia and had problems with his body movements and language and so on and so forth, and
Mm.
has autism. And I wrote an article for Forbes not too long ago, a couple of years ago actually, but it was how my son with autism taught me a lot about leadership, and it's a lot about letting go and seeing things differently. And I think that's what your son did for you as well as you came to faith. But I love the gopher story. I think that's pretty profound. How is your son doing?
Our son died before age 20. Actually, he was severely disabled. So yeah, he's waiting for us in heaven.
And how do you handle that grief? And because I know there's a lot of people that'll be listening to this, and they lost a child or had severe setbacks or difficulties or pain. How have you handled that grief?
They probably ought to talk to my wife. First of all, I think grief is probably different well, it's different for everyone. I think it was worse for her. I know, when she sees, um, Derek had red hair. I don't know why, because, well, I obviously don't have any hair, but, Francie and I both have brown hair, brown eyes. So, um, she'll see like a especially when he was younger, she'd see like a red-haired boy, about what age he would be. And, parents are complaining about, what their kids are doing and trouble they're getting into and whatever. And she just thinks like, yeah, well, wish Derek could get into some trouble. He never could. Um, so I think it's been harder for her. I had my work to throw myself into, which I probably did too good a job of doing. Um, but yeah, I just time and walking through it.
Well, it's difficult. My parents lost one of my brothers as well,
Mm.
and they communicated to me before they passed that it is the most difficult pain that they ever experienced in their life. And it's hard to see it. I can imagine it's difficult to lose a child. It's just not supposed to be that way.
Yeah,
But
that's the thing. It's like it just feels like it's not the natural order, that to bury a child. We read something once, some magazine talking about divorce rates for um, they had divorce rates for like having a disabled child, which was, I don't know, like 85, 90%. Divorce rates for death of a child, like 92% or something. Divorce rates for a business failure was like high 90s. And we've had all three. Um, so, and we'll be married 42 years next week. So that's a testament, obviously, to God and to my wife's stubbornness, probably as much as that.
well, one of the ways I think you have overcome a lot of the difficulties in your life and your business is giving back, and which we were talking about earlier, not only giving financially, but giving time. And you talk about in the book of giving back into your community and volunteering. Can you talk a little bit about how God has used that and what you do to volunteer?
Well, if you're talking about the dishwashing, that's actually a paid position.
Okay.
I do get paid. I don't get paid a lot. Some guy, I was washing dishes one day and some guy kind of sauntered in the back, and I don't know if he's waiting for the bathroom to get free or something, but he asked me like, "So, how much do you make?" And I said, "I don't really know. I don't. Yeah, not not here for the money." Um, yeah, so I ended up as a dishwasher. We moved here when before I retired, I would get up at 3:30, pray, study my Bible, and be at my desk at 5 o'clock in the morning to try and get some things done before everyone else got in. And then I'd usually be home by 6, unless there was a night meeting, which usually once or sometimes twice a week there was. So long hours. And when I retired from the engineering and we moved up to Bend, built a house up here, I liked Monday mornings to grab my Wall Street Journal and my Ember mug and head over and have an ocean roll, which is the Sparrow Bakery's kind of signature sweet roll, and just very luxuriously squander an hour or two reading my paper and enjoying my coffee and my ocean roll. And, being there every week, you kind of get to know the people who are working there, and you get a sense of the operation. And it's, impressed me right away that the people who worked there, they were having a good time. They had each other's backs. They cared about their customers. They worked hard. But this was a nice place, and I'm sure you teach leadership lessons on, your people are what control the success of your business, the experience of your customers, everything depends on the people. So one day I'm leaving and I see a sign on the exit door that says, "Hey, attention high schoolers, we're looking for part-time dishwashers." And I didn't pay any attention because I just retired from a job. And obviously high school is a long way back for me. But the next Monday, the sign was still there. And the following Monday, the sign was still there. And finally I asked, because I'm thinking to myself, well, how hard can it be to hire a part-time dishwasher? So I asked, and I said, "Hey, don't you guys need to take that sign down?" They go, "No, no, we've got some time. We're waiting for the right person." They had a guy who was mostly baked, but he washed dishes on Monday, and he was going to go to Belize for 2 months with his girlfriend. But they had some time to fill his spot. And as I walked home that day, I thought, well, maybe the reason they haven't found a dishwasher is God has my name on that, and
Mm.
he's just waiting for me to figure that out. So next time I was in, I said, well, I'd like an application for that position. And they said, oh, sure, Glenn, for who? Thinking I've got a nephew or a grandkid or something that I'm going to send in to wash dishes. I said, oh, for me. And they kind of shrugged and said, well, okay, sure. They got the application, said, well, turn this in with a copy of your resume. And I'm thinking to myself, really, resume for a part-time dishwasher? That's interesting. And there's some great business lessons along the way here. And so I thought about my resume. I'm graduated summa cum laude with a degree in engineering. I got a master's in business, started multiple companies. I'm a registered professional engineer in 3 Western states, licensed land surveyor. And I said, my resume is a little light on the professional dishwashing experience. And they said, Glenn, don't worry about it. We like to teach people to do things our way. So well, that's great. I have no bad dishwashing habits to unlearn. So I turned in the application and I modified my resume to, under career objective, put part-time dishwasher at Sparrow Bakery and turned it in with a cover letter explaining that I didn't want to take a job away from someone that needed one, but having owned businesses, I thought it could be useful to have someone who was trained, lived close by, and didn't need the hours. You could plug them in when you needed them, but you didn't have to worry about are they going to make rent that month or not. And so I finally get the call for my interview. And I thought, yeah, okay, well, find out I'm going to be interviewing with the owner of the company, not the manager of that location, which I thought, well, that's kind of interesting that you've got the owner of the company interviewing a part-time dishwasher application. And so I thought, well, I'll dress up. I mean, I didn't get rid of all my business clothes when I retired. So I put on my $3,000 custom wool suit. I got the pocket squared, the matching tie, my wingtips. I got French cuffs with custom gold and diamond cufflinks. And I walk on down to Sparrow Bakery. And I get in there, and Wes is pulling shots at the espresso machine. He says, hey, Glenn, you look a little different than when you usually come in. I go, yeah, I'm here for my interview. He says, yeah, I can confidently say you're the best dressed interviewee for a part-time dishwasher position we've ever had. So I sat down and the owner came out and I talked to her and I explained to her, look, I know I'm not going to wash dishes dressed like this, but it's obvious to me from having hung around here that you've created something special here. And in my experience, that usually starts at the top. So I want to show proper respect for, what you've created, because I know that's not easy. And I also kind of, as we're talking, I kind of asked her, I was like, well, I was a little surprised that I'd be meeting with you for a you know, part-time position. She says, yeah, I do all the hiring. She says, the thing is the frontline managers, they're desperate to fill the slot because they're the ones that have to make the schedule work. She's one step removed. And so she says, we've had some bad experiences where they were so desperate to fill the slot. The guy had a heroin habit that we didn't find out till later. And that was a train wreck. So she says, no, I do all the hiring. It doesn't matter what the position is. I do the hiring. So anyway, I got the position. So, Francie had snapped a picture of me as I was going out the door in my suit. She says, I got to get a picture of this. Um, and I ended up getting the position. They told me afterwards that they often get requests from older people who think it would be fun to work there. And they say, we never hire them because, they think it'd be fun to decorate cookies or do some baking. And they don't understand this is a business. This is production. It's boom, boom, boom. I mean, you got to be moving all the time. But he said, you seemed a little different. We decided to take a chance on you. So that's how I ended up washing dishes. What I didn't know, some of the immediate benefits, and when I retired, I got some good advice. Someone told me, don't commit to anything for the first year. Says when you retire, people think you've got all this time and they think that would be great if you help them with whatever their projects were. He says, no, say no to everything for a year until you figure out what your retirement looks like. And I've added something to that when I counsel people for retirement. I think most people, when they think about retirement, they think about the bad things that they don't like about work that are going to go away when they retire. You know, they think about the meetings, they think about the Zoom calls, they think about the emails or the long commute or the hard to deal with customers or coworkers. And they don't think enough about the good things about work because those are also going to go away. You know, being part of a team, working towards a deadline, relationships that you've built sometimes over many, many years. All those are also going to go away when you retire. And so if you're smart, do some thinking about that. And how am I going to build that into my life, the good parts, when I don't have the job? And you don't have to go get another job to do that. So for me, working very part time at a bakery scratches some of that itch. You know, you're part of a team, it's fast paced. You get those accolades. I mean, I get a lot of appreciation because everyone knows if there's no clean dishes, everything grinds to a screeching halt. Um, so they're happy to have the help and, you know, coverage for someone getting sick or something like that. Um, but what I didn't find out till later was, you know, what I think why God put me in that spot. So when Francie took that picture, she texted it to some friend of ours here in town, and they had a daughter who was in college and had a couple traumatic experiences that basically shattered her. She dropped out of college, moved back home, just holed up in her room, and she knew us because she would come out and eat dinner with us when we went over there. So she happened to be in the kitchen when her mom got the picture of me dressed up in my tux going, or, you know, my suit going for the interview. And the mom laughed and the daughter asked, you know, what are you laughing at? She says, well, look at this. This is Glenn going to interview for a dishwashing job. And she said, well, I don't understand. Is he mocking them, you know,
Mhm.
with his training and experience and wealth? And the mom said, no, he's just looking to be of service, and he thinks God has his name on this opportunity. So 3 weeks later, Francie gets a call from the mom, and she says, you would not believe what happened, and goes on to describe how the daughter evidently thought, well, if Glenn can humble himself and go wash dishes, I can go do something. So she'd
Wow.
been stuck for years, and no one knew how to help her get out of that. But her seeing me going for a dishwashing interview somehow like unlocked that. And, you know, she got a job, she ended up moving out, she re-enrolled in school. And it was all because I took a dishwashing job.
Wow. Look.
Um, and then the other thing that happened a couple years after I started work there, COVID happened. And so with the owners being as conscientious and devoted to their staff as they are, they sent out an email to every employee, went to every employee and said, and had a bunch of questions like, look, we need to figure out how to get everybody through this as best we can. Um, you know, answer these questions. And it was like, how many people are relying on your job here at Sparrow? You know, what's your minimum number you need to kind of pay the rent and eat beans and rice kind of scenario. Um, and so, of course, I replied, you know, well, I don't need anything because I was just doing it to fill in anyway. So don't schedule me at all. I was really touched by a gal that responded to everyone that said, you know, I'm living with my parents, I'm in school. I do daycare. I will do daycare for anyone who needs it for free, so that they can work to provide for their family, you know, at Sparrow. Um, and I told the owners, like, look, if there's something I can do to help, um, you know, let me know. And so the time came when they called and we had a chat, and, you know, they were scheduling people as much as they could. I mean, they still had bills they had to pay. They didn't want to take any of the government bailout things. So, you know, we're just going to figure it out on our own here. And they told me we've got things pretty much working and everyone's surviving, but we've got a couple salaries here that we can't quite meet all their salaries. If that's something you could help out. So I said, sure, we have that separate account. Um, I can write checks. And, you know, it happened 2 or 3 times. It was, I don't know, maybe $10,000, not a huge amount, but it just reminded me of kind of like, I felt like Joseph kind of placed ahead of time. So when
Right.
the famine came, I would be in a position that I could help. So
That's awesome. Hey, one of the things that I love about your book is at the end of the book, talking about a different perspective, and you write your life story from two different perspectives. And I won't ruin it for everybody that wants to read the book, but can you talk about how you discovered the benefit of kind of looking at the positive of things rather than seeing the negative of it?
yeah, and I don't know. I mean, I wish I had a secret advice or some way. I think it's mostly the way I'm wired. Although I wasn't always like that. I was a I was a nervous kid, and worried. I was a worrier. I gave myself like a ulcer in junior high, trying to get good grades. And I don't know, I just worried about stuff. I remember worrying about what happened when I died when I was like in junior high. Um, and so at some point, and some of that comes, I think, with experience. It's like you realize that the worst scenarios probably didn't happen. And even if they did, somehow you got through it. Um, So that's, I think, just living a long time helps with that. Although, I don't know, I know people that, just won't let go of the bad things that happen and just live their entire lives on bad things that happen, and they don't notice the good things that happen to them. So yeah, I don't know, but it's, when you talk to someone that is just hung up on the bad things that happen, sometimes like decades ago. And
Right.
it's like, I know that's not the whole story. There's another story there. And that's the one you need to start thinking about and telling yourself.
Yeah, I love it. I thought it was a real practical, powerful example of just how to look at things. And I think that God teaches us that different perspective, because sometimes it's easy to look at what's happening to us, but sometimes God shows us what he's doing with it. And I thought the way that you just described your entire life story, and it was so powerful. And so I do encourage people to get your book and read it, devour it, because it's got real practical steps on how to lead a life and how also to lead a business. Hey, I had a couple of other quick questions. I know we're almost out of time. One of the things that was impressive about your company, and one of the things that we see with Gossamer Gear, is your continuous improvement. You weren't just satisfied with your first version of the backpack, and you talk about this in the book. How did you decide when to improve, how to improve, and tell me a little bit. I know that probably comes from your engineering background that you still saw the ability to improve, even though it was a great product.
Yeah, I think a lot of that is kind of the way I'm wired. I'm always looking to optimize and improve. Drives my wife crazy. I have learned like wives are not a good subject for trying to improve your wife, at least in my case. But yeah, and I've actually applied that to business also, just always I'm not a fan of like huge programs to, you know, redo everything. I mean, sometimes you need to, but I'm really a fan of like what tweaks can we make? What if we used a postcard instead of a letter for that? Or, what if we did this way? Would that help the customer better? And sometimes I think a lot of little tweaks, you can get a lot of bang for your buck out of that. And obviously that applies over to gear. I'm always looking, usually every trip I take, I'm like trying something a little different, trying to optimize, trying to tweak, trying to take some weight out or add some function in for the same weight. Um, so yeah, it's a character flaw, some people might say, but yeah, it's never being satisfied. Yeah.
Was there a time though, as you thought about now's the time to make that change? I know you talked about even in the book, like even the stitching using a different type of thread or a lighter thread as you went through it. But was there a time where you said, now we're going to make that switch, or what, from a business perspective, that you decided, hey, was it a certain weight that enabled you to do that? If we could get to that, what I'm just asking, what measure or metric, if there was one, that kind of led you to know this was the time to, I'm sure you were always innovating,
I
but
was
when,
always innovating, and that's one thing about being a small business is you don't have like 10,000 of the current model to get rid of before you can implement it. It's like, no, the next time we order, we'll do it with this. Um, yeah. And the thread thing is interesting. I didn't realize that was in the book. Obviously, we're using very light fabric for our gear. And, if you use really heavy thread, then if there's stress, you get the fabric can fail. Whereas if you use light thread, then if there's more stress than it can handle, well, the seam can go. Well, you can sew up a seam pretty easily, but trying to patch like a fabric panel that is blown out is an entirely different proposition. And I think there's probably business applications of that.
Absolutely.
Um, it's like my structural design things. It's like you be careful how much steel you put in a reinforced concrete beam, because if you put too little steel, I hope I get this right. I didn't do a lot of structural engineering, but my recollection is if you put too little steel, it will fail gradually, like it'll bend a little bit. If you put too much steel and then load it beyond its capability, it fails catastrophically. Um, so I think there's probably life applications to that too. Beware of over reinforcing, and maybe a little bit under is the way to go.
Excellent. Yeah, excellent. Hey, I know you also mentioned earlier that Harvey McKay was a friend. He also bought into the business. We have some small businesses at times where they get offers from maybe a larger company or an investor. Was there any concern that you had when through that process to let Harvey come into the business and to kind of help shape it going forward? Or what was your thought process when you just made that decision?
Well, this was John Mackey, the co-founder
Oh,
of Whole Foods Market.
sorry.
Um, and, I was going to close the business down, which I was okay with because it would give me more time and wasn't going to affect me financially because I wasn't taking any money out of it. So I was okay with that. So I wasn't looking to sell. It wasn't really on my radar. So, any offer was fine for me. I mean, he said, I'll pay you $100,000 for 75% of the company, and I want you to stay involved, and you can be as involved or uninvolved as you want. So I didn't really see a downside. So that was an easy call, and I was just going to shut it down anyway. So
But do you have any advice on partnerships, or is it that mutual respect or that kind of vision that's similar to what you're trying to do? Or how did you have some of those conversations about where he wanted to go with the business?
he was never involved in the business. He just thought it needed to continue. He hired someone to run it. I mean, he's running Whole Foods Market. He's obviously a very busy guy. Um, didn't have time to run a gear business.
Right.
I'm sure he could have done a great job if he had, but um, so yeah, he wasn't involved in running the business. He just thought that the gear was good and innovative, and that the company needed to continue, until such time as either I decided to do it full time or something else happened. He just thought it was good gear, um, and had the means to make sure that it continued. So
Excellent. I love it. Hey, Glenn, thank you for being with us today. We do primarily work with Christian CEOs and business owners that lead their business by biblical principles. Do you have a parting word or maybe a biblical principle that shaped your leadership in life that you'd like to encourage other leaders, or a last word that you'd like to tell us today?
I'm not sure it's biblical, although probably you could find that it was. But kind of my shorthand for successful life is work hard, be nice, stay curious.
I love it. I love it. And I love the title of your book, Take Less and Do More. And I do encourage readers to go out, they can find it on Amazon. You also have a website. Can you tell us the website that they can go to find it?
Sure. The website is glenvanpeski.com. You can sign up for my fortnightly newsletter. I do blog posts. I've got gear lists on there, some videos, and some more information about the book also.
That's excellent. Well, thank you, Glenn, for being here today. And thank you guys for listening. We appreciate you turning into Well Done Leaders, the Well Done Leaders podcast.